Start of day 3, and this is a view from our balcony in Horod, which would have been on the German side of the front line. Many of you may be asking actually what the Western Front is and why it's the Western Front and not the Eastern Front. Well, at the outbreak of the First War, the Germans had the Stiefenpan in place, and their theory was that they would rapidly invade through Belgium and northern France, while hoping that the Russians on the eastern side would be slow to mobilise. Unfortunately, that didn't really work out, as the Belgians, supported by the British and the French, put up fierce resistance, and also the Russians mobilised fairly quickly. And so from the German point of view, the battle lines formed on the western side, which is why it was called the Western Front. The southern bit from where we are at the moment, which is from Verdun down to the Swiss border, never changed much at all during the whole of the war, apart from right at the beginning. So we're going to go down out of the Vosges Mountains today, heading towards Nancy, and there'll be 1 or 2 interesting sites that we're going to come across. So we're still up in the Vosges Mountains, and this is the Musée du Linge. Basically, this is a ridge up above the town of Munster, which was absolutely vital in protecting Munster itself. The museum here is absolutely fantastic. It has lots of reconstructions, and tells you about uniforms and the harsh conditions there were up here. But basically, the Battle of Linge took place July and August 1915. These were points, three summits along a ridge, not more than about 2 or 3 miles long, held by the Germans, and the French decided that they really ought to take them, and therefore get control over Munster. As you can see, these are the German fortifications, and despite massive bombardment and bravery from the Diable Bleu, the French mountain troops, 3 efforts were completely unsuccessful, with about 7,000 dead, more on the French obviously. This is a really good example of the battle lines and the very reinforced trenches, and the French were having to come up these slopes here. You can see they really didn't have cat and hell's chance. And 1 or 2 interesting facts also in the museum was the use of dogs and sleds. So they purchased 400 Huskies from Alaska, along with their sleds, and teams of 9 dogs and sledges would cart ammunition and supplies up to the front and then take the wounded back down again. And in the summer they used the dogs to tow trains along the route des Crêtes, which we drove along yesterday, and we'll do a short clip it again. Here you can see all the trenches as they were, and the whole network here, all now overgrown obviously with heathers, etc. Very, very strongly reinforced and scattered all over the hillside of these crosses, and people were buried more or less where they were found. And this one in particular says ici le 2e juillet. Oh no, that's 1975. That was when they found his body. It's in the Caporal Charles Texier, died 4th of August 1915. And this one, Soldat Français Inconnu, so unknown soldier, died in 1915, found in 1969. And there's a fairly typical observation post there, and then these rifle slots. All the way round. And a machine gun post here. This is a bit more of a reconstruction showing timber and turf tops to the trenches, then the very heavily fortified dugouts underneath here. And here now you've got obviously all this heavily forested area, but none of all this was completely blown away by all the shell fire that rained down on it, since it just would have been completely barren with no cover whatsoever. This is the inside of a German observation post, and you can see out there it says Pionier Comp. I'll work that one out. Here we're at an underground hospital constructed by the French behind the lines. This was planned in 1916 but not built till 1917, by which time this bit of the front line was largely redundant, but it's pretty well untouched. It had a space for 50 beds, 100 seated casualties, and we go inside here. Now inside the hospital, see it's a labyrinth of tunnels. Not extraordinary really, it's just sort of been left here. Obviously some of the tunnels are blocked off, and this would have had a one-way system, and these would have been wards down here. It was fully equipped. It was one that had a little operating theatre, offices, dressing rooms, and it's had 100 beds, and 50 beds and 100 chairs, couches, and then this presumably was the exit out here, and all very well protected from bombardment, which would have, at the time of its planning, would have been pretty continuous, but by the time it was actually finished, all the fighting was focused in Verdun. And this here gives you an indication of how it all worked. I arrived at the site of a massive underground mine explosion set off by the Germans underneath the French lines on the 10th and the 11th of July 1916. And as the memorial says here, the whole company of the 169th Regiment, Infantry Regiment, a disparu, so completely obliterated. And there were 5 mines. And if we come around here, you can see the crater itself, which is just huge. Unfortunately, I don't think the video does justice. It must be 100 meters either way. And you can see another massive crater. Yeah, it's probably even bigger. Just look at that. That must have been one enormous explosion. It's a very sad, but very peaceful spot. No movement at all apart from the odd bird singing. And as well as the my memorial, there's here a memorial to Lieutenant Aviateur de Commando. He and the navigator was shot down while on a photographic reconnaissance mission on the 5th of September 1917, which is 108 years ago to the day, age 25. And the added significance of that is his father was a very wealthy banker, and the combination of the grief of that and losing his daughter to Auschwitz in the Second War, he donated his entire art collection to set up the Commando Museum in Paris. It's a very moving place. And as we walk back down towards the van, you can see all the shell holes either side of this avenue of trees that has been planted. And in the undergrowth either side you can still see the overgrown remnants of the trench system.